everyone, Tom Pounder here, and welcome back for another episode of the Family Chit Chat. Hey, today we're going to continue our story on Joseph. And now, if you remember last week when we talked about Joseph, he had all these dreams about how his brothers were going to bow down and worship him one day. And his brothers didn't like that. So what do? They sold him into slavery. And he ended up into this guy named Potiphar's house. Now, it was a really bummer experience. But where we left it off was that God was with Joseph. No matter what, God was with Joseph. And when Joseph was at Potiphar's house, he ended up being elevated to a really high rank in the house. Even though he was a slave, he was a very high rank. But then something changed. So I want you to just read this story real quick and answer these few questions. I want you to see how things changed for Joseph, but then how God was still with him. All right, so pause the video right now, and then we'll continue after you read the passage and answer these few questions. Okay, so things were going along really great for Joseph. Things were going great, and then Potiphar's wife took notice of Joseph and wanted him to do something wrong. And Joseph didn't want to do anything wrong. He didn't want to do anything wrong against Potiphar, and he didn't want to do anything wrong against God. And so he chose not to. So what did Potiphar's wife do? She thought, I'm going to make up a lie about Joseph and get him in trouble. And she got him in trouble. And because of that, Joseph ended up in prison. But the cool thing about it, though, was even though he was in prison, God was with Joseph, and God was guiding Joseph. And Joseph then went into prison and had some great situations where he was able to interpret dreams for people, not because of his own power, but because of God's power. And he was hoping that that was going to be able to get him out of jail. Well, guess what? Unfortunately, it didn't get him out of jail. He was still in jail. The people forgot about him. But the thing was, God was still with Joseph. And the bottom line of today's story is, when life doesn't make sense, you can trust God is with you. Life is going to be great sometimes, but then life is also not going to make sense sometimes. But the bottom line is that God is going to be with you no matter what is happening in your life. And although it looks bleak and really sad for Joseph right now, there's a positive end to the story, and we're going to get to that in a few weeks, but there's a positive end to the story. And so we can trust that God is with us. Whether things make sense or not, God is going to be with you. So I want to encourage you to think about life and think how God can be with you no matter what situations you are in. And when they're not making sense, hey, one thing we can do is ask God, hey, God, what is happening now? Help guide me through this situation. Now remember, when things don't make sense, you can trust that God is still with you. He was still with Joseph, and he's still with you today. Hey, as we wrap up, I want to look over the memory verse that we've been talking about for the past few weeks. It's Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Things aren't going to make sense sometimes, but don't depend on your own understanding. Trust God. We know that we can trust God and that he will guide us through anything, whether we understand the situation or not. So trust God and rely on him that he's got a master plan working out and that he's going to guide you through it. All right, everyone, well, as you have stories about trust and as you have stories about how God has been with you, I would love to hear your stories. So definitely hit it in the comment section below. I would love to hear your stories today. All right, everyone, well, I hope you have a great rest of the week, and I'll see you next week with a whole new story on Joseph. Have a great week, everyone.